Hello, good afternoon. My name is Josef Holzer. I'm a farmer from Austria, farmer, forester, and entrepreneur. I'm head of a small company, engineering office, with expertise in the fields of water, water retention, geology, forestry, and agriculture. And of course, in these times, water is our best-selling product. Yeah, water retention. We do, investigations. We do planning. We do also implementing our water retention systems, more or less all over the world. Especially, of course, in Europe, especially in south of Europe. For example, you can see here a project we did a few years ago in the south of France, a water retention project with some retention ponds. I will explain this a little bit later. So our expertise in the field of water retention maybe was the maybe this was the reason why Groundswell asked me to talk about water here. And it was the reason why I decided to use the quote from Percival Alfred Humans, "Where water runs, make it walk," as a title for the talk. Then Groundswell officials asked me to also talk a little bit about my farm, because I'm a farmer in the Austrian Alps, and my farm, so that's my farmhouse, yeah, 1890. My farm, the Krameterhof, is quite well known because of my father, the so-called rebel farmer, yeah. And yes, I accepted. I told the Groundswell officials, of course, I can explain water retention and talk about my farm, because my farm is a quite typical, from a typical Austrian alpine mountain farm, small scale family farm, with about 400 meters of level difference between top and bottom. So quite a lot of opportunities to make running water walk, or even, in our case, also sit down, relax a little bit in our ponds, and then later gently walk down the slope again. So yeah, no problem, talk about my farm and water retention. But then they asked me the third question, and that, yeah, was the tough one. So do everything in 70 minutes. So obviously they don't know me so well. So because I need a day for a brief introduction in the topic. But then I realized maybe that's the only chance for you to survive my poor English and my accent. So yeah, challenge accepted. So let's get started, and please be kind. I'm used to talk a lot, but normally in German. And so yeah, look forward to a few mistakes, but hopefully I'm able to deliver the message, okay? So, the reason why I accepted as well was I like the idea of the Groundswell Festival. I really like it. Yeah, the networking idea. And I also like the idea to step out of your comfort zone. So that's why I'm here. Okay, so my farm. Located in the central part of the Eastern Alps, yeah, about 45 hectares, 1,100 to 1,500 meters of level difference, about 5 degrees average temperature, quite cold, 166 around, frost days, and about 750 millimeters of precipitation, so quite dry as well. So steep, dry, quite cold, but that's where we live. That's it. So the farm was founded in 1890, by my great-grandparents, and run as a self-sufficient farm until the 60s when my father took over. And self-sufficiency, and that's really important, means that they produce everything they needed to live. Yeah? All the cereals, all the plant-based proteins, beans and peas. Beans are really very important in my place, fava beans. Today we call it pig beans, you know. In the past they called it fava beans, and they were a really important food source. Potatoes and fruits and vegetables and everything, and not just a small farming garden, yeah? Huge fields, because they had to feed more than 10 people, yeah, in every farm, and it was not possible to transport things, no roads, yeah. It was important to produce everything there. And of course, if you have a self-sufficiency agriculture, you have a really diverse landscape. That's important as well. And it's important to understand. Because today, when people visit my farm, they think, you know, and they ask me questions like, you know, these crazy ideas of free-range pigs in the mountains, yeah? Where does it come from? Because pigs devastate the soil. So where does it come from? Or may you remember the map, all the ponds. We have fish ponds, yeah, and aquaculture, and we produce fish and crawfish and water plants, and we do a lot of things with ponds. So ponds in the mountains, crazy idea. Where does it come from? And all the other things we do. And the questions, you know, the problem is people see how the landscape looks today after specialization, and they see one solution. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to judge, it's not bad. That's one solution. Nice meadows, nice pastures, dairy farming. That's what farms do today in my region. That's how the landscape looks like. But the problem is, if you think and believe that what you see today is the only solution, yeah, you make a big mistake. And people in Austria tend to call things tradition when they do it twice, or they did it twice, you know? That's one of the biggest problems, because people think that's traditional farming, but that's not. It's one part of the traditional farming. And as my father took over the farm in 1962, he decided to do something different. Yeah? And I tell you, you know, all the stories about the history of my farm because it's important, because, as I said, if you know nothing about the past, you know nothing about present and about the future. That's really important. It's in farming as well as in other areas. So, for example, I told you about the pigs and the ponds. The little village my farm is situated in, the old name of my village was Pig Village, Saudorf. Yeah, and it's not because of our lifestyle. It's because we are famous for raising pigs. Yeah, since a long time. And where my great-grandparents come from, it was the Goose Mountain. You know, and all the water mills now they don't exist anymore. They used ponds because it was necessary to store water on a high level on the farm to use it as energy source when you have to use your mills, you know, when you're a mountain farmer. And that's important to understand. So when that's my father, yeah. So the bold guy, that's me. The guy with the hat, it's my father, 10 years old. When my father took over the farm, he decided to develop the farm a little bit different, because he wanted to farm in a way, in the way he loves, or he wanted to work, you know. It was his idea that you can, and it's really important idea, that you're just good in things you love to do. And so his idea was, yeah, if there is specialization, you know, into dairy farming, good thing, yeah, people can do it. Why one farmer shouldn't do something else? And he loved to work with fish. So the first thing he did in 1962 was he started to build ponds, to buy the old mint ponds, because all the other farmers, they sold it because, you know, when there is no cereal production anymore, you know, there's no need for mills and mill ponds. And the idea of my father's idea was, you know, the water was really precious, valuable resource for decades, centuries, and now it's nothing worth anymore. So he started to buy it. Yeah, all the farmers' neighbors sold it to him because if he's so crazy, you know, to buy water. And then he started to build the first ponds. And then he started to develop the farm in a way he loved to. So he worked with wild animals, you know, from woodcocks to deer, because he loved to work with these animals. And and of course, they were really expensive. Good to say. So that was the reason why the farm developed as a really diverse farm, and developed by trial and error. And that's also important to understand. Trial and error. Most of the things, a lot of the things were successful, but some also, you know, some big failures as well. But in the end, most of the things were successful. And so, in the 80s, 90s, first, you know, more prominent people visited the farm, and universities came by, you know, film teams. They wanted to see what the crazy farmer in the mountains, yeah, what's happening there. And then, of course, in the late 80s, it was the first. These, especially the people from the universities, they introduced my family with the concept of permaculture. So in the late 80s, my parents, you know, heard the first time about permaculture, and they were impressed, yeah, because the ideas were great, you know, great ideas, perfect match, yeah, all the things they did and all the ideas behind their work. It was really a perfect match. And of course, it was really important for them as well, because my father was successful, but still the crazy farmer. In the 80s, you know, organic farmers, you know, talking with worms, yeah, the crazy ones, I think everywhere. Quite sure here in the UK as well. So successful, but alone, a little bit. And that's also a reason why I really like events like Groundswell, because it's important to, the network idea is important, because it happens that you're too far, yeah, and then alone. So, as I said, perfect match. Look at the heads. So, perfect. Permaculture. We started to then work as a permaculture farm intentionally. So, permaculture, many of you may think, you know, you see Bill Mollison, one of the founding fathers of permaculture. May you think permaculture is a farming method. I don't know how good you know about this, but permaculture is more philosophy. And there are many people, yeah, important people in this idea, yeah, like Rachel Carson, for example, with the book Silent Spring. If you don't know it, buy it, read it. Really important. And may you remember the picture of the farms, how the farms look now in our areas. May you remember how diverse the landscape was before. We are at the moment, you know, on the step to the next Silent Spring because of loss of diversity of structures and landscapes. So it's important to be conscious. Or really important with water retention, this guy, Franklin Hiram King. The interesting thing, and you know, his big achievement was he was a scientist who understood that it's important to combine science and the practical knowledge of the farmers. So that's the scientist we farmers look forward to meet. Somebody who, also values the practical knowledge. For example, mulching and strap cultivation, really important. And mulching, for example, that's a picture of my area, or a few pictures. It's not a new invention. So, for example, that's potato cultivation. Yeah, that's not a bicycle, that's a plow run by a winch. Yeah, that's potato cultivation in the 50s in my area. Yeah, quite steep slopes. And people understood if you work there, erosion is a big problem, of course. So what they did was mulching between the rows as we do it now. So I produce potatoes also in steeper slopes, not only on terraces, because I also have areas like this. Yeah, there are plenty of areas on my farm more suitable for a downhill race than for farming, So I have to have techniques to deal with the problem. So mulching and also using vegetation to improve the infiltration. That's the important thing. So I just go back, because water retention, that's the main concept, not only I want to talk about today. That's one of the main things we have to think about when we farm in the mountains. So keep and store water in the areas where it falls is raining. That's important. So when my father started with the ponds, it was not because we have a lot of water, it was because we have not much water at all. Our ponds are dependent on rainwater and a few springs, not too much. So it's important to store it, to keep the water on the mountain as long as possible. So back to water retention and mulching. Cover the soil and mulch, yes, but it's also important to use the vegetation to improve infiltration. You need roots and vegetation. So in the past, all of these fields in the steep slopes, it was never a whole slope. It was always small parts of perennial and small parts of annual fields and cultivation. So that's important. And that's what we do. That's pictures of my farm. So perennial, meadows, pastures, and fields, and a rotation. So, because roots are most important thing for improving infiltration. And if you use trees as well, you can improve it even much more. Yeah, that's why we talk about agroforestry systems all the time. So that's my farm. We work with terraces. We work also with slopes. We work with pastures and meadows, fruit tree orchards, hedges, and ponds as well. We try to situate everything on the best possible place, because it's important to have an individual, tailored solution for your farm and for yourself. That's also really, really important to understand. So, for example, that's a medium-sized terrace with vegetables, and on the slopes, fruit trees, or on the downhill slope, fruit trees. On the slope above the terrace, it's more a pasture with trees to give the animals a little bit of shadow. So, or terraces, vegetable terraces, like you see in the next slide, with fruit trees. Because also we need, that's important, we're on a south-facing slope, we need also some shadow, that's important. So we have fruit trees also on the south-facing slope. So, or not only for vegetables, also for cereals. In the past, and I know to do it, we harvested, as as you may remember the slide with my father, by hand. Now we have a combine harvester. Good machine, by the way, Japanese rice harvester, and not too expensive, and enables us to work on small terraces. Really important. If you're interested, I have to tell you a bit about it, because that's a quite good thing, Italian, quite good non-profit organization idea. Okay, but it's more for the Q&A. So we work with terraces, we work with mulching, we work with covering the soil with vegetation, because we understand the soil is the most important thing for us, water and soil, because soil is, good soil is a good harvest. That's some of our vegetables. But not all of our colleagues seems to understand that soil is the most important resource. I work a lot, for example, in Spain or in South Europe, because, water retention, and South Europe, south of France, Spain, where water is really, the resource is really, in some areas, hardly available. That's the areas where we work the most. And when I'm there, I often see landscapes like this. And people tell me, and that is also the reason why I told you a few things about the past of my farm, people tell me, yeah, that's like it is. Has to be like that, because we have to till our orchards because of competition and water infiltration and plenty of excuses. And you have to think about a little bit that maybe it wasn't ever like that, because maybe in the past they used some sheep to graze in the orchards, but maybe it's just a small problem, yeah? And today also people tend to find a new excuse. They tell us, yeah, and because we have big problems because all the erosions and all the problems with our orchards, it's also because of climate change. That's one thing I hear all the time. And don't get me wrong, we have a climate crisis. Of course we have. But it's often used as an excuse in agriculture, because not everything is what we see now is climate crisis. A lot of the things is homegrown. A lot of the problems are structural problems in agriculture, and not only small problems. And I show you the next slides because it's quite impressive, and it's not because it's not because that's not a Spain bashing, We do the same mistakes everywhere. Here in the UK, we in Austria, it's everywhere the same, but it's quite impressive to see it, because you think maybe, look, that's areas where, it looks more like North Africa, yeah? Maybe that's because they are not fertile. And then if you go more in and in, then you see that's just agricultural devastation in huge areas, open bare soil, erosion, as far as you can see. Just because people think, yeah, that's traditional. It was always like that. We do it since ever. And that's the reason why we have open soils and huge problems in huge areas. But it could look like that. And it's not too difficult if you understand a little bit more about nature. Yeah? And if you stop to find excuses. That's the message I want to show you. And that's the same, of course, in Austria and in the UK. And of course, there are also you can find scientific research, few obvious facts. With more soil cover, you have less erosion, but that's a research about no tilling, no till olive orchards in Spain. But we have the same problem. We have it with agriculture in Austria. We have it in the UK. That's in the UK. For example, in Austria, we have an average soil loss of 7 to 13 tons per hectare a year. And that's just, the average loss. And we accept it. And it's not much better in the UK. So we have to understand the importance of topsoil and water. So water retention landscapes are systems where we keep the water where it falls. We try, most important thing first, we try to infiltrate the water into the soil, stop erosion, try to keep it where it is, stop it from destroying. When you have a lot of water, stop it, infiltrate it. But sometimes, of course, you cannot infiltrate. Sometimes it's too much, and therefore you can see on this slide, we have a concept of different solutions. We combine pastures, we combine meadows, we combine forest areas, and also water restoring systems like ponds. Because sometimes it's too much water. You have to store it and then distribute it and use it later. That's important, and therefore we need ponds, especially when you have infrastructure like roads, because that's one of the on one hand, main problems, the infrastructure, the roads in the mountains. For example, we in Austria, we have, 220,000 kilometers of forest roads, for example. And that can be a major problem. But on the other hand, it's also, opportunity to catch water, to use the infrastructure for water, to catch the water and then to store it into ponds. So our terraces are always combined with ponds. So I want to show you an example of one of my international projects. That's an area in south of France. You see at the moment, or on this picture, you see just a pasture. Since decades, just a pasture for sheep. Yeah, most of the people there, they think it's a sheep pasture. They forgot that these areas, you see, that they were fields. They have been fields in the past, cropped fields, but now it's a pasture, and that there are, people don't believe that there's a possibility to store, keep water here. But the owner asked us to develop a concept. So first, of course, we had to made some maps, soil investigation, test diggings, geological investigation, first step. Then, of course, calculating all the surface runoff from the whole area, because it's not about your own property, it's about the whole catchment area, as you may remember, the area where all the rain falls. Then some concepts for farming, then some detailed planning, and at the end, also implementation, construction work with fields and ponds. And of course, really important, good documentation. So that's it's still construction, but that's more or less the situation in the end. As you can see, all the ponds are built in a way our idea is to use the natural slopes, yeah, the existing terraces, and to build things so that they don't look artificial, not too much at least. The idea is a good pond, for example, should look like it was there forever. That's the main idea. So you see the existing terraces, and you see all the water inside. And that's at the, you know, when we took the picture, it was still construction. And the people there were really impressed because nobody thought that there would be water, even in years. But if you do it right, your calculation, if you do your surveys right, that's not magic. That's not rocket science. It's just proper work. So and that's the same with our ponds at home. That's the ponds my father built in 1962 to be correct. So 60-year-old ponds. And these ponds are multifunctional ponds. To store water, to protect us. So that's also, it's also, if you have floodings, the idea to store also, if you have too much water, to protect all your constructions, your areas below your ponds. That's also really important. It's also aquaculture, fish, crayfish, everything. Irrigation, you will see it later. So that's the first ponds. Now we come back to permaculture. It's important to understand how we think about water and how we think about farming. As I said, we are a permaculture farm. And people often think that permaculture is also just a farming method, but I want to stress the point that permaculture is a philosophy. And for me, it's the easiest way to explain it with three main pillars. So the first pillar is to learn from nature and try to translate it into culture, into farming. That's the first pillar, and that's the important one. You know, if you want to farm, you have to have knowledge about the soil, for example, soil and soil life and geology, and you have to learn it from nature. And it's just ignorance if you don't want to deal with the fact that you have to learn from nature if you want to farm. Or for example, if you want to have a food forest, agroforestry, or if you want to work with forests at all, maybe it's a good idea to learn from nature how a forest system looks like. So I am forester, for example. And that's what people think a forest looks like. But if you think that's a forest, you have no idea what a forest is. Yeah, that's a plantation. And people think at the moment plantations, yeah, or our forests are under pressure because of fires and bark beetles and droughts and climate crisis. But that's the best example that it's homemade. Because plantations, they have to collapse. Because natural forests, if you have a bit understanding about forests, they develop through collapse into a state of permanence. So you have to understand how a natural forest looks like. You have to see and investigate and watch and be out in nature. Then you will understand that this is a forest. So that's how our forests look like at home. And it's not about, we all have to work with natural forests. No. And you can work with a plantation if you want, but it's about informed decisions. That's the important thing. So if you want to have the risk, or if you you know what you have to do. And if you understand the importance of safety, you have to have a look at nature. So first pillar, learn from nature and try to translate it into culture, into farming. Yeah? Keep it alive in farming, keep the soil alive. And for example, forestry with permanent forests is really a good example for permanent agriculture. Keep the system of forests alive in your forestry. Yeah? That's important. Second pillar, we have to understand that we just have one planet, of course, and we have to work in cycles. I think one of the biggest problems in agriculture today is that we tend to forget that. So that's two of my, so one of a cow and a calf. I have about 20 cattle on my farm. That's more or less the amount same size neighbor farmers have. So if you understand, for example, that you can't live from 20 cattle, in my situation you cannot have 40 or 60 or 80, you know? Because that's road to devastation. You have to understand that you have to deal with the problem via diversity. If you have a limitation. And that's what permaculture does. So for example, I have ponds. I work with fish ponds. On my farm, we have about 30 ponds, but also with ponds, for example. Most of fish producers in my region, they produce trouts. Of course, a trout, yeah, it's a good fish. We have some trouts as well. Of course we have. But most of the farmers, they don't think about the food source. So 90% or more is fish from the sea, pellets. So I don't want to put sea fish in my freshwater ponds in the mountain. Doesn't make sense for me at all. And that's about thinking in cycles. Yeah, food cycles, energy cycles. And therefore, I have solutions where I want to have my fish as grazing animals. I don't want to have them, you know, just in a pond like, I don't know, poultry in a stable. I want to have them out on a pasture and therefore have fish as pasture animals. So different species. Also crawfish, for example. Perfect. Because if you develop the right habitat, yeah, then, you know, the only thing you have to do is harvest. And that's really great. So we produce a lot of crawfish. It's the idea of diversity, yeah, to deal with limitation. So our ponds look like you can see here. We have ponds for water plants. We have also ponds we use for sport, but we use them for fish, for crawfish, for water plant, for irrigation, for our waterfowl, geese and ducks. We use them for producing water plants in special water gardens. We use them for irrigation. We use them also for hydropower, mills, and also modern hydropower turbines. So that's the idea of multifunctional systems. And the idea of creating multifunctional landscapes. The idea that you always shall act in a way that the number of choices increase. And that's the ethical imperative, maybe you know Heinz von Förster. That's really, really an important quote. So, second pillar, circles. But now, the most important, or also, they are equally important. The most difficult one, the third pillar, That's the reflection part, because we are always under enormous pressure. We have to work a lot. We work the whole day. Yeah. We fall into bed as farmers, yeah, at night. And most of the time, we are tired and we have no capacities to reflect on our work. But that's really important, because we don't do things right. We stumble from one mistake to the next. And the reflection, the evaluation of our work, that's the most important thing. And that's the third pillar of permaculture. So for example, the simple question, what's about my soil? Do I have erosion? Is my soil improving or not? Do I want to be an earthworm on my farm or not? Or do I want to be a pig? Yes, no, maybe? That's the question. And it's also really important to understand that farming is not only producing. We as farmers, we live on the farm. And it's also about our life and our happiness. Really, really important to stress this point for me. Because as a consultant, I see so many farms and so many faces. Yeah? And it's important that you enjoy it. And to be, agriculture farming is one of the most creative work you can have. And joyful, if you do it right. So, what's permaculture? Permaculture is not a farming method. Permaculture is the idea to create habitats for humans, for other living creatures, sustainable cultural landscapes where we live and work, produce food, and be happy. That's what permaculture is. And that's not a utopia. It's possible, and I think it's necessary. Because if we forget that all of our land is or was in the past a cultural landscape where people did exactly that, when we just think in new production lines and methods, we lose a lot. We have to understand that it's all about cultural landscapes and it's all about habitats. But to develop these landscapes, we need farmers. And that's one of our biggest problems at the moment. For example, when my father took over the farm in 1962, from 1962 and 1960 to 2020 in Austria, about 11 farmers stopped every day. Now we are about 5 farmers every day. And that's a catastrophe, in my opinion. In Austria, we have about 3.5% of the working people working in agriculture, working with about 90% of the land. And that's a catastrophe as well. Because way too much work, way too much land, and not enough people. Because the most important number in agriculture, and I really believe in that, the most important number is not the climate, are not the climate numbers, soil, all important. Not the size of your farm and the horsepower of the tractor. The most important number is brains per hectare. How many people work on the farms, or on farms in general? Brains, hearts, that's the most important. To develop good ideas, creative new ideas, innovative new ideas. So it's really important to have more people in agriculture, to have more good ideas. So I really love events like this, because, like Groundswell, because it's really important to network, to motivate people to start farming again. Because if farmers stop, other people have to jump in. It's important. And of course it's difficult, yeah, if you start and you're not born and raised as a farmer, but it's important. And it's really, really important. So do it. So permaculture, as I said, is a philosophy. And it's about landscapes. And that's, once again, a picture of a tiny little part of my farm. So farm is is bigger, but for some reason the drones, they were always in the same spot. So it's about landscapes. So people often ask me, can you live from a permaculture farm? From landscapes like that, like you see here. And I told you, neighbor farmers, same size, they work, some with dairy cows, but most of them in my area are cattle farmers, not dairy cows, not milk products. So they have about 20 cows, 20 cattle, like I do. That's the same. That's not the limitation. The limitation is what you can, the ideas, brains, and of course also the hands. That's the limitation. So I do much more, and I could do even much more. We have different things. We have different animals. We have poultry, we have geese, we have chicken. We have cattle, so to equalize. We have pigs, free-range pigs, and sheep and horses. We do vegetable farming in greenhouses and of course on fields. Many different vegetables. Of course, cropped fields, with cereals and beans and so on. And of course, also other products like herbs. For example, the yellow plant in the bottom, that's the yellow gentian, one of my most important herbs I sell. We sell about a ton of roots just from this plant every year. And the income just from the only plant, just from the yellow gentian, is more than I could ever produce with my cattle. But I need the cattle to produce the gentian, because I grow the gentian as a weed in my pastures. And I have a pasturing concept where the cattle reduce, just by grazing, the competition, because it's not a competitive plant. And before I harvest, it takes about 10 years to grow. So kilogram starts from 25, lowest, up to about 100 euros. It's quite good. That's what I mean with multifunctional systems. That's what I mean with increase the number of choices, if you know what I mean. So, as I said, it's not just about farming, it's also about living. So be happy on the farm, because that's one of the major problems, as I said, in many farms. For example, in my region, you can buy farms because farmers are alone, and there will be no next generation because nobody wants to do it. So we have to find a way to love what we do. Because, I don't know how your beliefs are, but there's one thing I know for sure. There's a life before death. And that's the important thing I know, and that's why it's really important for me to create kind of a paradise on your farm. Because it's your habitat. So, and that's a quote from my father. And that, I think it was the idea behind all the things he did. Create something beautiful and nice, and look at nature as an example. Yeah, and that's the main message I want to give you. Of course, there are techniques for water retention. Of course, there are techniques for preventing erosions. That's not a problem. That's not rocket science. We just have to do it. But it's much, much more than that. We have to see it much more globally to achieve a good solution. And then I think utopia is not too far away. So, thank you very much. And thank you. So I hope I was able to deliver my message. And yeah, if you have questions, please. Yes, please. Oh, yeah, I think you need a microphone.
Thank you. These large pond systems, a little bit about the location of them and why you're citing them, why they are.
So, the location, it's important. A few things are important. So there is one big misconception with pond construction, and it's that we build ponds in wetlands. So that's wrong. So we need stable ground. No wetlands at all. Stable, dry ground. So the first thing is we have to have a look on site, of course, find an area big enough, not too steep, yeah, because it's about at the end of the slope. So we have slopes at the end, with slopes shouldn't be too steep. So so I don't know, 1, 2, 3, for example. Yeah, 1 meter up, 3 meter wide, something like that. So stable, solid ground, big enough, and really important, of course, we need to bring water to our pond, and it's important to also drain the water from the pond. So to have enough water for the pond and also safely to bring the water away from the pond. That's really important. That's important for the area. And of course, then we have to look at the soil. We need enough fine particles. So our ponds are always constructed just with the soil on site. We never work with plastic, and we almost never bring additional loam, clay to the construction site because it's way too expensive, it's way too much effort. So we think about what's the perfect place for the pond. So we want to find the place where we have enough fine particles in the soil to seal it. We have techniques to be able to build ponds even if we don't have loam. That's important as well. And of course, we need enough of the subsoil material to build a dam, because otherwise, if you have just 50 centimeters of subsoil, you cannot build a pond. So that's what we have to find out. And then, of course, that's really important as well, we need the concept behind the pond. So do we want to just store water, keep it there, store it, and also infiltrate it from the pond? Then it's possible that parts of the pond are not completely sealed. So we have infiltration as well. Could be a concept. if we want to store the water to use it for irrigation, for example, we need a watertight pond, of course, yeah? So depends on what we want to achieve. So that's the reason why we need this really individual solution for each and every project, for each and every farm. But first, the survey and the investigation on site, that's the most important thing. And maybe one more thing, these ponds are not so expensive. Because the idea is if you have knowledge about the subsoil, the idea is also to use the different layers where you need them. So sometimes you have soil layers you cannot use to seal, but you can use these subsoils for other parts of the dam, for example. So if you have knowledge about the geological situation, you can build ponds often quite cheap. Yeah? When you have to move material with trucks, everything gets expensive. As long as you work with the excavator, everything is cheap. Welcome.
Hiya. Thanks so much for coming over and talking to us.
You're welcome.
I'm just interested to know, in Austria, did you get any sort of, do you get government subsidies for the way you farm? And I'm also interested to know about what your main markets are. You're farming on quite small scales for certain products. So do you sell them individually? Because in this country, it seems like a very difficult farm system to try and introduce. Thanks.
Important question and a few important points for me. So first thing, subsidies. Yes, we have subsidies, but no, I don't get subsidies because I don't want to. I'm a free farmer, as you will. So my farm I don't need the subsidies on my farm, and I don't want to have it. I don't think it's a good idea anyway. I know we as farmers are dependent on subsidies, almost always, but I think we all are more happy if we get paid well for our products and we don't need the subsidies. So I think that's everywhere the same. So I don't need the subsidies. My scales are quite small, and subsidies are for small-scale farms like I have a pain in the ass because we have so many different fields. It's it's really hard to deal with that. So no, it's just always discussing and then forget it. Yeah. So I don't want to do it. So second thing is how I sell my products. That's the individual thing, because my farm, and the point is, you have to compare apples with apples. My farm is, of course, a mountain farm. Steep slopes, as I said. Neighbors, yeah, they have more or less 10 dairy cows. So, and not, cows with 10,000 liters. So 10 dairy cows, or, just cattle, just meat. Around 20, 30, depends, but not much more. You have to rent a lot of land, otherwise it's not possible. So the production is quite low. I do a lot of small things because I developed, or my father and me, we developed niches. And that's what it's all about. Developing niches. Because, if you want to survive, you have to sell directly to the customer. So I have different niches. I have restaurants. I have, star cooks, they buy from me. I have as well just production in my family, or for my family and for friends. For example, I have a few things, and that's quite important for the third pillar, for the reflection. I have a few products I don't regularly sell. For example, my geese. Yeah, we produce not much geese, about 50 around. I could produce and sell easily 300 or 400. And, of course, I can get a good price for my geese. No problem. Around 100 euros per piece, not a problem at all. But I don't want to, because for me, there's one thing really important with my animal production, and that's that I am on my farm responsible for the animals, and I don't want to, I have to do, that's the important thing, I have to do all of the things I don't like. So I butcher my animals. I kill them. And I have, of course, professionals to help me with butchering them. But I kill all the animals I sell. Because I don't want to give things away I don't. Can you help me? I don't want to. Ich mag es nicht delegieren, die Sachen, die ich nicht mag. Delegate, yeah. I don't want to delegate things I don't like. And that's important, because otherwise it's the risk that I do too much of things I don't like, because it's good money. And that's the wrong direction for my farm. I don't want to do that. That's my philosophy. That's my third pillar. So I just sell around the 50, and that's just for family, friends. It's more or less like Solavi, solidary agriculture, how you call it? Wie sagt man die? Solidary agriculture systems? How you call them? Community, yeah. But I'm the only one who decides. That's the difference. On my farm, it's just my concept, yeah? So, of course, I ask my family and my friends what they want, but it's just, that's the kind of production. And it's with a few of these things, I just do it in a small scale. Other products, I produce in a big scale. For example, herbs, as I told you, the gentian I sell for pharmacies. I sell it I sell about a ton of fresh roots, and that's the cheapest thing is the fresh roots, but I sell also dried roots and so on. So that's really a good product. So it depends. I try to sell directly, and I want to have niches. I want to have different pillars on my farm as well, because it's really risky if you are, and that's also history of my farm, it could be really risky if you have just one pillar. My parents, just one thing to understand where we come from. My parents produced a lot of, so in the 80s, they a little bit specialized in the direction of mushrooms, yeah, and a little bit in the direction of deer meat. So that was two big pillars in the 80s until Chernobyl. And from that day on, yeah, the mushrooms and the deer meat, it was worthless. And it was a catastrophe for our farm. And from that day on, my parents understood that it's really important to have more different pillars, at least two legs to stand on. That's important. And that's our concept. And the important thing, one thing I want to add to the answer is that it's not about having a permaculture farm like we have. So many people come to my farm and they ask me, no, that's way too much. I cannot have all the ponds and the vegetables and the fruit trees and the fruit tree nursery and this and that. And I try to tell them, you don't need to. It's not about copying what we do. It's about developing your own system. And it's not about that every permaculture farm must be self-sufficient and do all of that. That's stupid. It's about developing your own niches and your own farm. It's not about, copy-paste and everywhere the same. I think that's one of the biggest problems in agriculture anyway, that we do everywhere the same. It's about individual solutions. If we have 2 permaculture farms looking the same, at least one of them has a big problem. Yeah? So we need a lot of different solutions. Thank you.
Hi. So at the start, you were talking about how with good soil, with high organic matter, that it will like catch the rain where it falls, and that's the priority. Mm-hmm. So I imagine on flat enough ground with good enough soil, then a lot of like keyline dams and things like that become not necessarily a priority. My question.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, my question would be, providing you do have good soil, what is the kind of minimum incline? What's the minimum steepness where it becomes a serious consideration to implement keyline dams and things like that?
The keyline ideas, yeah, are quite old, and of course you have to understand the region, yeah, and the time. That's important. So the keyline ideas, Yeoman's ideas, great ideas, but of course these concepts improved over time. And of course we are, now we do different things now. So first thing is, of course, individual. What about your vegetation? What about your soils? What about not only the topsoil layer and your humus content, organic content? It's also about your subsoil. How fast infiltration takes place. How good is the soil capacities to store water. So all of these things, and of course the climate as well, because it depends on your rainfall events. That's the most important thing with water retention is the rainfall events you have. Yeah. So what about your 1 year rainfall event, maximum rainfall event, your 3 year, your 5 year, your 10 year maximum rainfall event, and do you want to store it? Yeah. Do you have the capacity to store it or not? So that's really important. And then the next step is maybe to work with vegetation, with plants, with trees, with hedges, and not with soil work. First, maybe with plantations, and then the next step is the soil work. And we always, when we try to design our projects, we have the ponds at the end, and also like swales and ideas like that. That's the last step. Yeah. Yes, of course. Yes, evaporation is an issue, of course, and it's never bad if it's surface water, if runoff. If you store runoff, it's way better. Yeah, if you keep it in a pond, then let it. Leave your property, then it's way better if it's a surface runoff to store it in a pond than do nothing. If you're in a high and dry in a hot and dry climate, of course you don't want to pump groundwater, put it in the pump and let it evaporate. That's stupid. Yeah, that's not what you should do. But it's better to catch runoff, keep it. And even if it evaporates, it's better than let it run off. Yeah, and it's not only in this situation. It's not only evaporation. It's you design systems where you want to infiltrate. So that's ponds, maybe not watertight ponds. Maybe just catch it and infiltrate it, or catch it and distribute. It depends on your events, on your soil. So it's hard to tell with the inclination of 10% yes and less no. It's way too complicated. Okay.
Final question.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. I suppose I saw the image of, the forest system, and when you have a plantation, and when there's a sort of collapse moment, and then there's a sort of permanent forest after that. And recently I spent some time with a group called the Movement Ecology Collective. And what they're spending their time doing is sort of drawing inspiration from nature about how it organizes itself and the various phases that it goes through to understand how we as a human society can organize ourselves at this time. And I suppose like the topic of collapse comes up quite frequently within nature, and I suppose as a human system that is a natural system as well. And I suppose the sort of the harsh realities that may be coming. I mean, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation in the 2030s, there's a 40% chance that will come to an end, and the climatic effects of that certainly in this country might be that we have a 10 degrees on average cooler climate on average, so the extremes around that will be much greater. So I suppose I'm just really interested, this talk was beautiful, and I'm interested to understand if you have any thoughts about what lessons we can learn from nature about how we organize our human society at this precarious time.
Thank you. So maybe first about the collapse in nature and this for example, the forest system, and then maybe second part of the answer is the about our society. So it's really important for me to stress the point that we have to learn again how natural systems look like, to understand them. That's really important. The problem we have is we have not much examples left. And that's one thing we have to do. So maybe you heard about it. We have in the European Union now the nature restoration law. Yeah, that's one thing. Farming lobbies are against it, partly, but just the big scale. Small-scale farmers understand that it's quite a good opportunity, and it's quite good. But anyway, the idea of keeping examples to learn from, that's really important. So for example, when I did my education as a forester, one of the most important moments was to visit an actual natural forest, prime forest, but not somewhere else, in Austria, tiny little piece, and not, that's often the case, you know, if you want to protect areas, often protect areas nobody needs, you know. In Austria, it's quite handy. We have the Alps, you know, the high mountains. So if you have protected areas, it's always, you know, an alpine or zones or higher, 2,000 meters and up, because nobody needs, you know. We have lots of protected areas, but it's important to have protected areas where it really counts. Because if we understand that our land is not, we have almost no nature left. Everything is cultural land. Everything is cultivated in one or the other way. That's what we have to understand. And we need the examples of natural forests, of natural, I don't know, ecosystems to learn how it could be. What would nature do? Yeah? And that's important, because if we see, you know, our forest systems, we tend to think, okay, oh, that's how it is. As I told you, when I'm in Spain, for example, and it's not about Spain, you know, we do the same mistakes everywhere, but it's in the harsh climates, it's more obvious, you know, in these hot and dry climates. It's much more obvious than in our quite nice climate. So if I'm there, I have to calibrate myself again, because the first thing is I believe what I see is the only solution. So I have to know, I have to have the knowledge that there is something else and it could be different. And therefore it's really important to have it. The first time I walked through the natural forest, it was like, you know, the soil was so soft, it was more like a little bit of flying, yeah? And the trees were impressive, because if you look in our plantations, you know, Austria, about 50% of our country is forest. From this, the 50% of forest in Austria, we have about around 60%, just one tree species. Picea abies, spruce. Nice tree, but nice tree where it belongs to, not in all the country. So the last, we have one collapse after the other. Bark beetles. We have not so much fire, but we have windbreaks. It's a huge problem. In the last 3 or 4 years, it was about 30%, 50%, 40% of the total harvest, just calamities. It's crazy. And then people and colleagues of mine, foresters, they think, what do you see? That's forests, and that's how it is. Because they don't know how it could be. And that's important for the society as well, to have the examples how it could be, to be more, we try to, I think often we just run through the world like this. We need the examples. That's the important thing. So we have collapse, yes. I have not a big problem with the forestry collapses at the moment in our country. So I don't think bark beetles are a problem, are a pest. The problems are the foresters, because they change forests into forestry, into plantation. That's a joke. It works just in German. I'm sorry, but that's the problem. Yeah. So we need. So I think we have these systems. Well, they are quite good. Yeah. It's not the big catastrophe. Our forests will change into a better system, because to keep it like they are at the moment, it's too expensive. So they will change anyway. And our society has to understand, and that's important, that more people should know about these things. If you have on the one hand just 3.5% working in agriculture and forestry, that means that on the other hand, you have about, around 97%, 96.5% of people not knowing at all what happened in agriculture and food production and forestry. So you delegate 90% of your land to just 3.5% of people. That's also not good. It's not only about it's too much work and too much pressure on the 3.5% of people working in agriculture. It's also not a good idea to delegate everything and to say, I don't need to know what happened with 90% of the country, or of the, that's also a big problem. So it's good to start to learn, to watch, to investigate, and it's always you need natural examples. That's important. Yeah. Okay. One more question? Or? No?
I think.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.